radio and online.
Debt crisis in the United States. The House of Representatives delays a crucial vote just days before the government's due to run out of cash. The military commander of the Libyan rebels is shot dead by an armed gang, but it's not clear who was behind the attack. And French officials are set to reveal more details about the Air France plane which crashed over the Atlantic, killing more than 220 people. Hello, welcome to BBC World News. I'm Martine.
I'm Tanya Beckett. Coming up later in World Business Report, markets continue their slide as Congress remains paralysed over America's borrowing levels. Plus, from debt deadlock to fears of a faltering recovery, attention now turns to US GDP figures for the second quarter.
A day of political wrangling over the US debt crisis has failed to resolve the issue. The vote was due to take place on Thursday night in the House of Representatives, but this has now been put off. Let's go live now to our correspondent Steve Kingston in Washington. Steve.
Yes, this was the day on which the Republican Party was supposed to throw down the gauntlet in the struggle over America's gargantuan debt, but it didn't work out that way. The proposal in the House of Representatives that they had hoped to have passed was not passed. In fact, it wasn't even voted on because of a lack of rank-and-file Republican support, all of which, of course, is deeply embarrassing for the party leadership. This was the longest day for John Boehner, the most powerful Republican on Capitol Hill. He had hoped the House of Representatives would back his plan to slash the deficit and raise the debt ceiling. But some on his own side remain unconvinced. And as night fell, the critical vote was postponed. Over at the Senate, Democrats were trying to keep a straight face.
Apologize to everyone for the late hour. We've been waiting for the House to conduct their business, and they're having trouble conducting it.
And at the White House, Barack Obama is now a concerned spectator. It's for Congress to decide whether he can break the $14 trillion debt ceiling. All of this may make for riveting political theatre, but it leaves America no closer to resolving the mess over its debt. And if there's no deal by next Tuesday, the government of the most powerful nation on earth will have a cash flow crisis. That means impossible choices. Would they prioritise day-to-day expenses on pensions, benefits and government salaries, or the interest payments owed to creditors, including foreign governments like China? As Treasury officials plan for the worst, many believe a default would threaten America's preeminence in the world.
It would probably entail a decline of the dollar relative to other currencies, and probably doubts in the mind of those people who reserve currencies as to whether the dollar is effectively the ultimate and prime currency of reserve.
As the clock ticks, global stock markets are showing the strain. Such is America's weight in the world that Washington's dysfunction is everyone's problem. Steve Kingston, BBC News, Washington.
Now, Steve, raising the debt level has happened several times before in the past. Why is this year proving so difficult, so fraught?
Well, I think you have to look to what happened in last November's midterm elections. The Republicans triumphed, and within that there was a particular strain of republicanism, the so-called Tea Party movement, grassroots conservative activists who are very much against Washington as an institution and government spending in particular. So a lot of the people that John Boehner is failing to convince now are people who were elected on that platform. And one of the many worries amongst Washington watchers here is that if these people are not going to vote for John Boehner's own proposal, i.e. their Republican proposal, what hope is there therefore them perhaps voting for a Democrat-led proposal, which is the alternative coming out of the Senate? And remember, under the American system of shared power, both houses of Congress have to vote in favour of something before President Obama can put pen to paper and sign it into law.
Now, going back a few hours, a large number of pizzas were seen being delivered to Republican congressional offices, which usually means that they're in for the long haul. What changed?
Well, I mean, they were twisting arms into the night and trying to convince recalcitrant members to change their position and vote in favour of the Boehner plan, essentially saying, look, you're with us or you're with the Democrats at this point. And frankly, that didn't work as the night ticked on. They say they will come back, the Republican leaders, Friday morning, but it remains to be seen still whether Mr. Boehner, the Speaker of the House, can get this vote through.
OK, Steve, thank you very much indeed. So tense times in Washington and indeed tension spreading around the world, because even if they do cobble together a deal in time for August the 2nd, they're not out of the woods, are they?
No, it appears that there's still going to be pressure on the bond markets, and US treasuries are held very widely around the world because, of course, the US imports goods at quite an alarming rate, as you can see from its current account deficit, and therefore the dollars are held abroad because they pay in dollars for that. So a lot of these are then held in Asia. So that is a concern. So the concern is not restricted to US borders. That's the first thing. The second thing is we will see later today what the growth figures are doing in the US. Now, they really need a growth rate annually of about 2.5%, and they're not getting it. It's going to probably be well below 2%. That means that the growth rate, the unemployment rate, which is currently in excess of 9%, will not be chipped away at. And without that, there's not really much momentum behind the US economic growth, and that's the big concern at the moment.
And the markets clearly don't like this.
No, they don't. In the past, really, they've been fairly sanguine about it because the assumption has always been that they would do a deal. And even if they get to August the 2nd, there are still financial reserves there. It's not as if suddenly the entire US economy will come to a halt. But they don't like the fact that politics appear to have taken precedence over the US economy at the moment, or indeed the credibility of the US economy.
All right. Lots more on that, and indeed the rest of the financial news in about 20 minutes or so in World Business Report with Tanya. Now, rebel leaders in Libya say their military commander, General Abdel Fattah Yunus, has been shot dead. The head of the Rebel Leadership Council, Mustafa Abdul Jalil, said General Yunus was killed by an armed gang after he was recalled from the front to appear before a judicial committee.
For many years, Abdel Fattah Yunus was firmly at Colonel Gaddafi's side. The country's interior minister when the conflict broke out in February, General Yunus was one of the highest profile figures to defect. Yet though he became the man who led the rebels' military campaign against Colonel Gaddafi, it seems he was never entirely trusted by the insurgents. Some suspected that his and his family's relationship to the Gaddafi regime in Tripoli was not completely over, and found his presence spearheading their efforts to topple the government deeply uncomfortable. Nor, of course, was he ever forgiven by Gaddafi's inner circle. Rather, he was seen as a traitor by Tripoli. Either way, his death has come under strange circumstances. The National Transitional Council in Benghazi said General Yunus was shot shortly before he was due to appear in front of the Judicial Committee. An armed gang apparently shot Yunus and two of his aides. The head of the gang has been detained, but the NTC stopped short of linking them to Gaddafi's regime.
First, the NTC would like to announce 3 days of mourning. Second, all the revolutionary efforts will come together to seek the criminals and our martyrs' corpse. Thirdly, this is the last warning to the armed gangs operating inside the cities.
What bearing his death might have on the conflict is very hard to gauge at this point. As the rebels try to push on towards Tripoli and ultimately overthrow Colonel Gaddafi, it isn't clear whether the rebel leadership has lost a valuable asset or a compromised former insider. Will Grant, BBC News.
Poland's Interior Ministry is due to publish its long-awaited report into the plane crash in Smolensk in western Russia last year, which killed President-elect Kaczynski and 95 others. Several reasons for the cause of the crash are expected to be listed in the Polish report. US and North Korean officials have started talks in New York amid signs of a possible easing of military tensions on the Korean peninsula. The Americans say they're looking for signs that North Korea is serious about resuming stalled negotiations on its nuclear weapons program. The new president of Peru, Ollanta Humala, has been sworn in, promising the poor a greater share of the benefits of economic growth. During the ceremony, the former army commander said he'd govern as a moderate and promised to tackle inequality and corruption. A memorial is to be held in Norway today for the victims of the mass shooting on the island of Utøya and the bomb explosion in the capital Oslo a week ago, which left at least 76 people dead. The search for bodies on the island has ended. Anders Behring Breivik